in the chamber that wish to vote or change their vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 93, the nays are 0. Nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table. The President will be immediately notified of the Senate's actions, and the Senate will resume the legislative session.
Mr. President.
Mr. Leader.
For the information of all senators, there will be no more votes tonight. I've been had a number of conversations with the Republican leader today. We're going to have 1 or 2 votes before our caucus luncheons tomorrow. We'll have a number of votes set up after the caucus luncheon. We're moving to finish this bill as quickly as we can, which will be this week. And I know that a number of people have been waiting around for votes. I know Senator Paul's been waiting around. I think we have a pathway to be able to have a vote on that tomorrow afternoon. I know that, let's see. In Nebraska, that's an amendment there. Wicker has an amendment. We're trying to move to those as soon as we can. Anyway, we're going to have some votes tomorrow. No more votes tonight.
Senator from Vermont.
The distinguished senior senator from Oklahoma and I recognized for a total of 6 minutes, evenly divided.
Without objection.
I yield to the senator from Oklahoma.
Okay, Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Senator Leahy and I have 2 amendments. He has Leahy amendment number 50. I have my amendment number 6. And I say to my friend from Iowa, well, we'll just be a couple of minutes because I know you were kind enough to let us go in front of you there. This has to do with the liability of those individuals who are taking making their own sacrifice to help people in distress. It's something that those of us who are pilots have done in helping individuals and being relieved of some of the individual liability that might be incurred. His amendment goes a little further than mine, but I'm satisfied with his. And so what I'd like to do is request unanimous consent to withdraw my amendment number 6 that gives liability protection to volunteer pilots and organizations, and also request unanimous consent that I be added as a co-sponsor to the Leahy amendment number 50. We've been in negotiations for a number of weeks on this. In fact, we were even last year. And I think we've reached an agreement that we would both find acceptable.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I might say for the distinguished senator from Oklahoma, he and I worked together to advance both of these amendments in a bipartisan way. We worked together to do it last year. We're working together again this year. Our amendment closes a gap in our Public Safety Officers Benefits Act for emergency service providers by extending federal benefits to emergency service providers who die or are disabled in the line of duty, who work for private or nonprofit emergency services. Tragedy 2 years ago in Vermont highlighted this. First responder Dale Long from Bennington, Vermont, was Bennington Rescue Squad's 2008 EMT of the Year. He's a 2009 recipient of the American Ambulance Association's Star of Life Award. Shortly after that ceremony, he was killed in the line of duty. But given the private nonprofit status of his ambulance service, he's ineligible for federal death benefits. Now, the Judiciary Committee, all Republicans, all Democrats, unanimously approved this legislation last Congress. The Leahy-Inhofe amendments fully paid through an included offset. I know the distinguished senator and I have talked about this. He comes from a part of the country where people have to fly to rescue. We drive to rescue them because we're much smaller in land area. They fly to do it. Either way, we ought to be doing something to protect the people who are out there trying to rescue or aid people in distress. So I am proud to join with Senator Inhofe on this, and I would hope at some appropriate time the amendment as now amended will be accepted.
And Mr. President?
Senator from Oklahoma.
I would respond by saying that on numerous occasions in my, I guess, 55 years in flying airplanes around, I've done a lot of the Good Samaritan things, and it never really occurred to me during that time. One time went all the way down to Dominica, just north of Caracas, Venezuela. I was telling the senator from Iowa about that, leading 10 planes. 8 of us made it down and back. That was something that we didn't have to do, but nobody else would do it. And so I just believe that we could encourage a lot more people to do these Good Samaritan duties if we gave them a little bit of relief of liability. And I would ask unanimous consent that after the senator from Iowa make his remarks, I would be recognized for up to 10 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection. Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, I want to discuss for a few moments here a few amendments that are pending that I think would undermine the basic rights and protections for American workers. In these difficult economic times, working families are struggling enough. Wages are stagnant. In fact, I saw a report the other day that in real terms, when you take inflation into account, wages right now for working men and women are where they were in 1974, almost 40 years. Job security is harder to find. More and more companies facing financial pressures are deciding to cut corners on fundamentals like worker safety. Now more than ever, workers need the basic protections that our laws provide. The last thing we need to do is take a step backwards and make working people even more vulnerable than they are today, especially in terms of their safety and health. But that's exactly what the Wicker Amendment and the Paul Amendment would do for two groups of very dedicated people, flight crews and transportation security officers, who work every day to keep us safe when we travel. First, the Paul Amendment would undermine valuable safety and health protections for flight crews. I don't think it would come as a surprise to any of us to hear that working on an airplane can be a dangerous job. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, flight attendants, as well as other employees in the air transportation industry, suffer occupational injuries and illnesses at rates far higher than workers in nearly every other sector of private industry. This industry raises unique safety challenges, and we need to make special efforts to keep these workers safe on the job. Now, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, regulates all workplace safety issues on airplanes. However, at Congress's urging, FAA has entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration that is supposed to facilitate consultation and coordination between the two agencies about safety issues. Now, this is entirely appropriate, since the Occupational Safety and Health Administration has the expertise in this area. But that coordination hasn't been effective in recent years. While a 2000 FAA report identified areas where flight crew safety could be improved, after that report, coordination essentially stopped, and the FAA has failed to take additional action to review and implement the recommended workplace safety standards. The bill that we're considering now on the floor would restore and improve the level of coordination between the FAA and OSHA so that they can complete the valuable work outlined in that memorandum of understanding. It would just basically require that the two agencies put their heads together and consider whether any OSHA standards should properly be applied to people employed on aircrafts. Now, I want to be very clear on this point. The bill does not supplant FAA's authority. OSHA would not be conducting investigations or issuing fines for FAA-covered employees. That's the sole purview of the FAA. All the bill says is the two agencies should continue to talk and to coordinate, and this seems to be eminently sensible. It simply defies explanation to preclude this kind of coordination, and it could put workers' lives and workers' safety at risk. For example, flight crews are currently exposed to a variety of dangerous chemicals, including jet fuel vapors, compressed oxygen, commercial cleaning agents, de-icing chemicals. Yet there is no current rule requiring that the employees be informed of hazardous materials in their workplace. OSHA has a safety standard about hazardous communication requiring that workers be informed of such hazardous materials. Now, it's a simple, easy to comply with standard. It saves workers' lives. The 2000 report that I referred to earlier found that FAA could implement OSHA standard on hazard communication without any implications for flight safety. But what has happened? Absolutely nothing. Despite finding that the OSHA standard could improve safety for airline employees, that it would not impact aviation safety, the cooperative effort stalled in its tracks. This bill would kind of resuscitate that cooperation. This is just one of a number of important reforms that would improve workplace safety without compromising flight safety. Hardworking flight attendants and other flight crew workers deserve our best efforts to make these reforms a reality. Again, I just want to make one point very clear. The legislation does not change or undermine FAA's role at all. It simply fosters cooperation between two government agencies, one that has a lot of technical expertise, the other one which has the jurisdiction. And again, I just think that this would be something that you'd say, well, sure, they should cooperate and communicate. The amendment before us now would say that they could even collaborate and would make people less safe on the job. So here's my colleagues to protect the safety of our workers by opposing this amendment. I'm equally concerned about the impact that the amendment by Senators Wicker and Collins would have on the hardworking people who keep our airports and planes safe. I've spoken about this amendment before, but I'd like to bring it up again. In legislation that we created when we created the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, Congress gave TSA the right to determine whether transportation safety officers, TSOs, have the right to collectively bargain. Now, those are the people we see every time we go through the airport, and they check our IDs, and they run the machines that check our bags. These are our transportation safety officers. Well, the Transportation Security Administration found that collective bargaining could improve security by addressing the agency's chronic low morale and employee engagement. However, certain subjects remain off-limits for bargaining, including pay, deployment, training, and any TSA emergency response measure. Now, right now, the TSOs, under what the TSA wanted to do, would be allowed to collectively bargain, but for those certain items. As I said, pay, they couldn't collectively bargain on pay, or deployment, or training, or emergency response measures. Now, as I mentioned, when I previously addressed this issue on the Senate floor, a recent, quote, best places to work, end quote, survey ranked the TSA 220 out of 224 federal employers. The agency's turnover and injury rates are among the highest for any federal agency. Low morale and high turnover at a frontline security agency are a recipe for disaster. TSA determined that collective bargaining will address those problems and improve the agency's ability to fulfill its mission. The TSA's decision is well-reasoned and sound. It states that a, quote, one-size-fits-all model of labor relations that undermines initiative and flexibility would not serve TSA or its workforce well, end quote. That's exactly what this amendment by Senators Wicker and Collins would do. It would lock into place one model of labor relations, the most adversarial model that's most harmful to employee morale. As I just said, we know that employee morale at the TSO level is very low and a very high turnover rate. Now, while my colleagues who support this amendment cite concerns about disruptions to security procedures, the agency believes, I agree, that those concerns are misguided. First and foremost, I question the assumption underlying this concern, that men and women who take a job protecting our nation would cast that duty aside if they were granted basic labor protections like collective bargaining. I think that's an insult to every man and woman in uniform who works under a collective bargaining agreement across this country. To suggest that unionized security personnel are somehow less effective, less dedicated, less willing to put their lives on the line in an emergency is just plain scandalous. Most federal security employees, including Border Patrol personnel, Immigration and Custom officials, are Capitol Police officers who protect us, Federal Protective Services officers. They all have collective bargaining rights. And I also always point out that famous picture of September the 11th, 2001, when that awful, awful tragedy happened in New York, and those buildings came down, and we saw the thousands of people running away from this disaster and the buildings falling down. While running into the buildings were our police, our firefighters, and our emergency personnel. All of them, every single one of them, a member of a union, every single one of them covered by a collective bargaining agreement. Did they shirk their duty? Did they shirk their responsibilities? Not a bit. We're proud of them. So why should TSOs be any different? Again, the exclusion of deployment and training and emergency response measures from bargaining will prevent any disruptions to security procedures. So I firmly believe that collective bargaining is the best way to bring dignity, consistency, and fairness to a workplace. It will make our TSO workforce safer and more stable. Restoring these essential rights is long overdue. I urge my colleagues to oppose the Wicker-Collins amendment. Finally, Mr. President, while I think it's critically important that the bill we are considering must not be a vehicle for rolling back worker protections, I regret that it will not be a vehicle to correct an outrageous attack on workers' rights that was enacted on this legislation in 1996. In a rider to the 1996 FAA reauthorization bill, Congress made it harder for employees of an express carrier to organize a union in order to unfairly advantage one company, FedEx Express. The bill carved out employees of an express carrier delivery company, which met only one company, FedEx, from coverage under the National Labor Relations Act and placed them under the Railway Labor Act. As a result, it is difficult, if not impossible, for FedEx employees to organize and bargain collectively. Now, what's the difference? Well, under the National Labor Relations Act, workers can act locally in seeking to organize and bargain collectively. Under the Railway Labor Act, workers must organize nationally. Nationally. An enormous challenge in today's labor environment, especially for workers who do not necessarily work in mobile industries. So under the current law, if package sorters in Des Moines, for example, want to organize a union, they'd have to go to New York and Georgia and Texas and California to get every warehouse worker in the country to join them, which is obviously extremely difficult. This quirk in the law is not only illogical, it's the worst kind of political favoritism. Now, why do I say that, Mr. President? Because obviously one of the biggest competitors of FedEx is United Parcel Service. United Parcel Service allows they're under the National Labor Relations Act. Now, not every single one of their employees is unionized, but they're allowed to organize and bargain collectively. Now, in certain states that are covered by union shop, then they would all be covered. In a state like Iowa, which is a right-to-work state, some of the employees of United Parcel Service would be members of a union, some wouldn't. But they would all be covered by a collective bargaining agreement. So, United Parcel Service, their workers doing the same exact job as FedEx workers can organize and bargain collectively. FedEx workers can't because they're under the Railway Labor Act, not the National Labor Relations Act. That was a rider to this bill in 1996 to favor one company. Again, identical jobs for FedEx and other company, different rights under the law. That's unfair. Congress should ensure that companies compete on a level playing field. We shouldn't be picking favorites. We shouldn't be picking favorites, especially not by silencing the voices of employees of one company. In past Congresses, I have introduced legislation to eliminate this special treatment and ensure that employees who have nothing to do with air transport have all the rights they're entitled to under the National Labor Relations Act. There are tens of thousands of truck drivers and warehouse employees who have nothing to do with airline travel, and the rules of the game are rigged against them. I had hoped that this bill would provide an opportunity to right these past wrongs. But I know it's important to complete our work on the FAA's reauthorization in short order. This bill will create hundreds of thousands of jobs. It will make crucial investments in our nation's infrastructure. As a pilot myself, my friend from Oklahoma has been flying even longer than I have, I think, but we've both been flying for a long time, and I've been one of those waiting for the next gen to come on board because it's going to enhance flight safety. It's going to make a lot easier for our general aviation pilots to fly in this environment, and it's important to get the bill done. So that's why I support the bill. But again, I had hoped that we would have addressed this inequity that exists in this as it regards the Federal Express. But it's not, so we'll have to carry on the battle on another bill on another day, because I think it is just an issue of fundamental fairness for workers, and hopefully we'll revisit this again sometime in the future. Mr. President, I thank my friend from Oklahoma for being so patient, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Before my friend from Iowa leaves the floor, let me just mention that when he talked about next gen, I can remember, and he can remember, years ago when we first flew, there's nothing but a low frequency out there. And we used to shoot those approaches, low-frequency approaches. And then they came along with VORs, and I thought this has got to be the end of it. And then they came along with moving RNAV. They could pick up a VOR and move it over here. What more could they ever do than that? Then Loran came along, then GPS. Well, I quit saying that it can't get better, because now there's hardly a runway in the world you can't shoot an instrument approach on using GPS. I flew an airplane around the world, all across Siberia. It's bad weather all the way. I just shot my approaches with a GPS. You know, you could train a chimpanzee to do it with a GPS. So, yes, we're anxious for next gen. I agree with my friend from Iowa and these opportunities that we have that are coming up to enhance the safety and abilities of general aviation along with commercial aviation.
I just say to my friend from Oklahoma, if you just yield for a second, first plane I owned had an old, I call the old coffee grinder in it. You get the A and N, you know, nulls, and that would take you into the airport. So I remember those days quite well. Thank God we got GPS now. Yeah,
I think, my friend. Let me mention a few minutes ago, I talked about two amendments that I had in the FAA bill. One was what I would call the Good Samaritan Amendment. We've talked about this for years. Senator Leahy and I have come to an agreement that while I would like to have it go further and offer liability protection beyond just the pilots, who might be offering their services, as my friend from Iowa and I have done many times at our own expense, because no one else would do it. I mentioned, I say to the occupier of the chair that it wasn't that many years ago that there is a horrible hurricane that wiped out an island called Dominica, north of Caracas, Venezuela. And I can remember putting together 10 flights, 10 airplanes, general aviation airplanes. And we took doctors and nurses and generators and goods down there and food and water because nobody else would do it. And this type of thing is going on all the time, and I just think that they should be afforded some protection from the liability laws. But I do realistically know that, that with this compromise we can get it passed, and this would offer individuals protection. But the other amendment that I have is quite different. It has to do with something that's called Subpart S of FAR in the regulations, Part 121. The Department of Defense, many of the movement of troops and individuals rely on supplemental carriers. Supplemental carriers. We're talking about non-scheduled carriers or charter airlines. And these are airlines that are non-scheduled. They come under a separate part, Subpart B, and they are given some exemption from the crew rest rigid parts that affect the scheduled airlines. Now, it's easy for a scheduled airline to have these very rigorous crew rest times because they are, as it says, scheduled. But when you get into non-scheduled, you are getting in some areas where it's much more difficult. So I would like to say two things about it. First of all, the supplemental air carriers have had a safety record that is even better than scheduled. There has never been one time in 15 years that the NTSB has cited some kind of a relation, something wrong, something that happened with the Part B or the non-scheduled carriers as a result of fatigue. It just hasn't happened. I often say we get so anxious to pass laws around here, and I've always had the philosophy that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this is not broke. It's worked very well. So I think that their record speaks for themselves. The thing that a lot of people are not aware of is if you are in a non-scheduled airline, you are able to have longer rest periods, even though you may go over the 15 hours of actual flight time. And so they end up getting, it works out in the long range, and they can do things that they couldn't do otherwise. Now, here's the thing that not many people realize. Non-scheduled airlines, the Department of Defense depends on them for 95% of all military passengers and 40% of military cargo. That's going into Iraq, Afghanistan, all throughout the danger points in Southwest Asia. And it is expected that these new regulations will negatively impact the mission capability and increase the cost to both the carriers and to DoD. Supplemental flights in support of the Department of Defense are carried out under control of the Air Mobility Command. That's in Fort Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. A central feature of the supplemental carrier's ability to complete these critical missions every day is the flexibility built into Subpart S of the FAA regulations. Now, I'm not offering something that is going to change how they treat Subpart S. I'm only going to say that they currently have a rule that they're considering. And this rule would change the, do away with the distinction between Subpart Q, R, and Subpart S, which is scheduled, non-scheduled airlines. And so if we are depending upon these non-scheduled airlines to fly our troops, our cargo into these areas, these war-torn areas, then there's no other way of doing it. You can say, well, the Air Force can use their C-17s. Right now, the Air Force's C-17s are in an op-tempo where they can't take on any more missions. So you have critical things that are happening, like flying blood into areas of the of combat. Let me just give you a couple examples, Mr. President. There's a regular run that goes from NATO, that's Belgium. It goes from Belgium to Bagram, then back to Amsterdam. They're taking things like tents, cargo, gasoline, food, and other supplies. That would be 19.6 hours. That means they can't do it. To do it, they'd have to have crew rest time, and that would have to take place in Bagram. There are rules against it. You can't leave a commercial airline in Bagram. It cannot be done. And so you have to figure out some way to get that cargo in and out of Bagram. There's another regular run that goes from Germany to Kandahar, then to Hong Kong. Well, that's 17.5 hours. So you can't do that because you can't leave your aircraft in a war zone. From Shannon to Kyrgyzstan in return, that's something that is 16 hours and 15 minutes. That can't be done. I think the one that is most critical is twice a week, one carrier currently operates and takes life-saving blood runs twice a week from McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey to Ramstein in Germany, then to Qatar. Now, from Qatar, they have to go all the way to into Afghanistan and back, and that round trip extends beyond the 15 hours that would be allowed with a scheduled airline. So under Subpart S, they can do it. And we're talking about twice a week regular runs, taking blood into areas in Afghanistan where it's critical that we get it in. So I'm just saying that we should, and the FAA, in promulgating the rules that they're looking at right now, should take in consideration that there is a separate type of a mission that has to be performed for our young men and women in harm's way, and we can't do it unless we treat the sub-S parts of the Rule 121, FAR 121, from the scheduled airlines. So I'm hoping that we'll have a chance. My concern is this. There are a lot of people there that, for some labor reasons, they don't want to have anyone to have that ability to go beyond the 15 hours, even though they get more crew rest time. And I'm the only one up here talking about the fact that we have lives of our young men and women in harm's way at stake, depending on these sub-S treatment. So this thing is very, very critical, and I really believe that we should do something to make sure that if they're going to look at the rules, that they at least look at the rules in a different light than just looking at them all together, but look at sub-S and hear the testimony and see if that doesn't warrant a special consideration. Mr. President, there's nobody, I don't see anyone else in the chamber waiting to talk. I only want to make one comment. I was in shock when I got off the plane and saw that the President, and read what the President came out with in his budget. I think it's unbelievable. $8.7 trillion in new spending, $1.6 trillion in new taxes, $13 trillion in new debt. The current year deficit increased by $1.6 trillion, not 1.4 or 1.5 as they talked about before. And it's just incredible that this could be happening right now. And I just wonder if he didn't get the message of last November 2nd. That is, people know we cannot keep extending the spending. The fact that we had increase in the first 2 years, this came straight from the White House, from the administration, our spending greater than all spending in the history of this country from George Washington to George W. Bush. I mean, it can't happen. And people are talking about the deficits that took place during George W. Bush. The average deficit was $247 billion. And that was right after trying to rebuild a military. And after 9/11, we found ourselves in, for all practical purposes, 2 wars. So instead of a deficit of being $247 billion, the deficit in this administration has been $3 trillion in 2 years. That's inconceivable. Now, I thought that he'd come out with something after listening to the State of the Union message, it'd be something that would start moderating and start trying to save some money, and it just hasn't happened. The only big loser, this is spending money on everything except the military. I don't know why it is that liberals never want to spend money on the military. An $80 billion cut over a 5-year period in the Department of Defense. And this is right after we went through the 90s where we had a drawdown of our defense by about 40%. And, of course, we find ourselves now after 9/11 in 2 wars. So I just think that we need to make sure the American people realize that the State of the Union message sounded real good when he said we're going to start putting a freeze on. You know what that freeze was, Mr. President? The freeze was to take the non-defense discretionary spending and freeze it for 5 years. But wait a minute, that's after he increased it over 20%. So you increase it so we can't afford it, and then you freeze it there so we can't bring it back down. So anyway, I hope that people are looking carefully and seeing what's happening. They will. If you look at what they're doing just on the oil and gas industry, and I know that there are a lot of people out there in the liberal communities that want to put them out of business, well, they're going to successfully do this if they pass this particular budget. And I'm talking about the percentage depletion, the IDC, the Section 199 manufacturer's deduction. By the way, the only industry under this budget that is affected negatively about that is oil and gas. All other manufacturers in the industry are all right. So I hope people have a chance to look at this very carefully. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. Yes, the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. President.
Senator from West Virginia.
I ask unanimous consent that the order of the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the pending amendments be set aside to call up the Baucus Amendment, number 75, as modified.
Without objection. The clerk will report.
Senator from West Virginia, Mr. Rockefeller, for Mr. Baucus, proposes an amendment numbered 75 as modified.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the clerk dispense with the reading of the amendment, and I
Without objection.
yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent to dispense with quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to talk about one of America's great institutions, Gallaudet University. On July 4th, 1861, President Lincoln celebrated our nation's independence on the eve of the Civil War by declaring to Congress the principal aim of the U.S. government should be to elevate the condition of man, to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear the paths of laudable pursuit for all, to afford all an unfettered start in a fair chance in the race of life. Just a few months before that, President Lincoln signed into federal law the authorization to confer collegiate degrees to the deaf and to the hard of hearing at a campus in Washington, D.C. For the first time in the nation's history, and still alone to this day, Gallaudet University is the only liberal arts university in the world dedicated to the pursuit of higher education for deaf and hard. A gem for this city, a gem for our country, a gem for the world for higher education. Truly a national university located a short distance from the Capitol and founded by President Abraham Lincoln. I am one of two appointees, one from the House, one from the Senate, by statute to the Board of Trustees at Gallaudet University. During my tenure on the board, I've met with proud alumni and supporters of Gallaudet in Ohio and here in Washington. Last Friday, I was again on campus and met with members of the board, the President's Cabinet, and a few students. Someone I admire a great deal, with whom I've talked to about the culture of our nation's deaf community, are Jay and Meredith Crane. Jay is a member of the Gallaudet Board of Trustees. Jay and his wife, Jay and Meredith, are outstanding advocates for Ohio's deaf community and culture. Jay and Meredith have a son and a daughter who are deaf, and they demonstrate to all of us how important a Gallaudet education can be in one's life. Jay's son, in an event in Columbus last year, explained to us how Gallaudet is an oasis for students who have lived all over the country, generally integrated into a community, but having a sense of isolation among people who are not deaf. Yet Jay's son, when coming to the university, talked about what an oasis Gallaudet University is for him and for his classmates. The parents, the educators, the administrators of Gallaudet serve as role models and continue to make a difference in the lives of students. It's why the relationship between Gallaudet and our federal government is so important. It's why our support and encouragement of deaf and hard-of-hearing students allows them to explore new opportunities and experiences to enrich our workplaces and our communities. The overwhelming majority of undergraduate students at Gallaudet are deaf. About half of the graduates, the students in the graduate school at Gallaudet are deaf, and half of them are hearing students. Many of those graduates, undergraduate and in the master's program at Gallaudet and the graduate program at Gallaudet, many of those students go into serving the deaf around the country. Many of them, as Jay's and Meredith's son, go into other professions not directly concerned with the deaf. Jay and Meredith's son, for instance, is in law school in California. Most of these students come from middle-class or working-class families. 2008, 2009, more than 80% of Gallaudet students receive financial aid in order to get the education they deserve. And these students are talented. I will soon have a Gallaudet intern by the name of Brianna Johnson, a student at Gallaudet, who is an education and human rights justice major. She'll be graduating in May 2010. She's on the Dean Scholars list. She is originally from Atlanta, Georgia. The Gallaudet University women's basketball team ranked 18th in the nation, was undefeated until, unfortunately, this past weekend when they lost to a school from Penn State, Harrisburg. They play in the Northeastern Atlantic Conference, Athletic Conference. Their Division III guard is a graduate from the Columbus School for the Deaf in Columbus, Ohio. Their head coach is Mark Elin. Their assistant coach came out of one of the great women's basketball programs in Ohio, Stephanie Stevens, a 2010 graduate of the University of Cincinnati. She went to Pickerington High School, which has been in the state finals, Final Four many, many times. Mr. President, as we prepare our nation to win the future and outcompete and out-educate the rest of the world, we must ensure that mission includes all Americans. The creation of Gallaudet 140-plus years ago helped establish a nationwide community for generations of deaf children. Ohio's first school for the deaf was established in 1829 in a small house right near where the State House now is on Broad and High in Columbus. That school, the Columbus School for the Deaf for Ohio, will soon have a new campus on 200 acres on Morse Road in Columbus with convenient student housing and modern education technology and space for future expansion. Such progress demonstrates how far education for deaf and hard-of-hearing students has come and how much further it can go. Last year, I gave a speech on this floor honoring Gallaudet as the Senate passed a resolution commemorating the 104th and 145th anniversary of Gallaudet's charter that was authored by President Lincoln. 141 years ago, the three members of Gallaudet's first graduating class received degrees signed by President Lincoln. Last year, during Gallaudet's 140th commencement, 10 Ohio students graduated from Gallaudet with a degree signed by President Obama. I'm concerned, though, Mr. President, that funding for Gallaudet may be compromised in the budget that's working its way through the House of Representatives. Gallaudet's budget has been frozen at $118 million for, I believe, 3 straight years. They've gotten no increase in federal funding. They raise private money. They obviously charge tuition, although a huge percentage of their students, as I said, are in scholarship. And the federal money they have has not increased over the last, I believe, 3 years. So my concern, Mr. President, is as the budget makes its way through here, we don't just help those students who are going to Gallaudet, but we do understand that Gallaudet is one of our nation's gems, a national university unlike any other, not just in the United States of America, but any other university anywhere in the world. The proud alumni of Gallaudet have enriched our communities and have taught all of us the meaning of the values President Lincoln laid before us, that we educate ourselves as part of a community full of opportunity, free of, as Lincoln said, free of artificial weight that works towards the good of our society. Mr. President, Gallaudet is a jewel for our country. It's an honor to be on their board. It's an honor, frankly, to me, and a mission for the United States of America that we continue to assist this great national university, that it's a credit to all of us in this great country. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
you.